She walked through the glossy airport lounge in worn-out sneakers and a simple cardigan, her hair pulled back in a no-fuss ponytail. Nothing about her screamed wealth or power. In fact, most people barely noticed her until she stepped into the first-class boarding line. That's when the stares started. Whispers followed. A few passengers chuckled quietly to themselves, exchanging smug glances. "She must be lost," one muttered under his breath. Another scoffed, shaking his head as if her presence was some kind of mistake. But she didn't flinch. She clutched her small travel bag, kept her head high, and moved forward as though she had every right to be there. One flight attendant, clearly unsure, hesitated before checking her boarding pass. Her eyes widened for just a second, but she quickly stepped aside and let the woman through. Still, the passengers weren't done watching. The laughter may have faded, but the judgment lingered in the air like a heavy fog. What they didn't know, what none of them could have guessed, is that the quiet woman they dismissed so easily wasn't just another traveler. She wasn't trying to sneak into first class or hoping to upgrade her seat with charm. No, this woman had a reason to be there far greater than any of them could imagine. Because the moment the plane doors closed and the welcome announcement played, everything started to change. Whispers turned into stunned silence, faces drained of color, and it all began when the captain's voice came over the speaker, addressing her personally. So, who was this simple woman, and why did the crew treat her with such unexpected respect? Stay tuned, because the truth behind her story is one you'll never forget. The captain's voice crackled through the speaker, calm and clear. "We'd like to give a special welcome to one of our most valued guests on board today, Mrs. Reyes." Heads turned instantly. Mrs. Reyes? People looked around, trying to spot someone important, someone who looked the part. But when they realized he meant her asterisk, the same woman they had laughed at just moments ago, confusion swept across the cabin. Some passengers started whispering again, this time with a different tone. Who was she really? Why would the captain single her out like that? She didn't seem like someone who flew private jets or had assistants trailing behind. She looked like someone's mom, someone's neighbor, a woman who might work a local store or volunteer at a school. Yet, here she was, sitting quietly in first class with a window seat, sipping water like nothing had happened. A flight attendant approached her shortly after takeoff, not with the usual routine, but with a soft smile and a question. "Would you like to pass a message to the cockpit, ma'am?" Again, eyes watched. Some passengers leaned in, pretending to sleep, just to catch a word or two. As the hours passed, curiosity grew. A man in a sharp business suit finally leaned over from across the aisle. "Sorry to intrude," he said politely, "but do you fly with this airline often?" She looked at him, not coldly, just calmly. "Every now and then," she said with a small smile. "My husband likes me to check in once in a while." The man laughed awkwardly, not sure what to make of it. He didn't know yet. None of them did. Because this woman, quiet, modest, and kind, was connected to the very heart of the airline itself, and the truth was only just starting to come out. The flight continued smoothly, but the atmosphere in first class had shifted. The laughter was gone. In its place, curiosity, and something else. Unease. A few passengers began to replay their earlier behavior in their minds. One woman, dressed in designer from head to toe, had loudly joked about economy passengers sneaking in. Now, she sat quietly, her phone in hand, pretending to scroll while stealing glances at the woman across the aisle. Mrs. Reyes hadn't said much. She didn't need to. Her presence alone was enough to stir questions. 2 rows behind her, a young couple whispered back and forth. They'd taken notice when a crew member handed Mrs. Reyes a handwritten note mid-flight, something they had never seen before. The woman squinted, trying to catch a glimpse of the paper, but Mrs. Reyes tucked it away in her travel journal without a word. The note wasn't from just any staff member. It had come directly from the captain. Meanwhile, in the galley, 2 flight attendants quietly discussed what they knew. "That's the founder's wife," one of them murmured. Mr. Reyes, he's the CEO. She keeps a low profile, but she's been on the board since the beginning. Everyone respects her. The other nodded slowly, clearly piecing things together. That explains the personal welcome and the fact the head of customer service boarded the plane just to greet her. Back in the cabin, a businessman pulled out his tablet and searched the airline's leadership. His eyes widened when he saw her name listed on the company's founding team. He looked up at her, suddenly realizing how wrong they'd all been. But none of them could take back how they treated her before knowing the truth. And Mrs. Reyes, she noticed it all, every shift in behavior, every awkward glance. But she still hadn't said why she was on this particular flight. That answer was coming. As the flight neared cruising altitude, a subtle tension wrapped itself around the first-class cabin like a fog no one could shake off. The once confident passengers were quieter now, stealing careful looks at the woman they'd misjudged. Some were clearly uncomfortable, others just curious. But all of them were waiting for something, and it was coming. Mrs. Reyes gently opened her journal, not to read the note again, but to write something. Her pen moved slowly, thoughtfully, while a young flight attendant stood nearby, waiting respectfully. She nodded once, then walked swiftly to the front of the cabin. Moments later, the captain's voice returned, this time firmer. "We'd like to thank our passengers once again for flying with us today. A reminder that we're honored to have Mrs. Reyes on board, one of the original visionaries behind our airline's success. Her visit today is more than personal. It carries great importance for our team." Now, there was no more pretending. Every eye was on her. Passengers leaned out of their seats, some whispering, others wide-eyed. One of the men who had laughed earlier looked as if he wanted to disappear into his seat. The businessman with the tablet was now fully focused on her, trying to read every movement. She still hadn't said much, but her silence was louder than anything anyone else could say. Behind the curtain at the front, the head of operations, who had quietly boarded just before takeoff, was preparing for something big. A meeting, a decision, something that would not only affect the airline's future, but also change how these passengers viewed the woman sitting just feet away from them. Why had she chosen this asterisk flight? Why today? What message was she bringing, and to whom? The answers were about to arrive, but not yet. Just when the cabin had settled into uneasy silence, a sharp chime sounded overhead, a signal rarely heard mid-flight. The lead flight attendant moved quickly down the aisle and leaned in to speak quietly with Mrs. Reyes. She listened calmly, then nodded once, closing her journal and standing up without a word. The air in the cabin shifted again. Something was happening. Passengers watched as she was escorted through the curtain to the front of the aircraft. Whispers exploded. A child nearby asked innocently, "Where is she going?" But no one had an answer. The man with the tablet tried refreshing his browser, searching for clues, but the Wi-Fi had just been disconnected for technical reasons. Another quiet but deliberate move. The tension thickened. Then came the unexpected twist. A flight attendant returned to the cabin and walked directly to the suited businessman who had earlier questioned her presence. "Sir, Mrs. Reyes would like to see you for a moment." His face went pale. He hesitated, glanced around as if hoping someone else had been called. But no, it was him. As he followed the attendant to the front, passengers leaned in, their imaginations running wild. Was he a senior executive? Had he said something earlier that offended her? Or was it something deeper? No one knew. But the stakes had just been raised. This wasn't just about a woman being underestimated. It was becoming something much larger. Behind the curtain, voices were low but intense. Staff members gathered around, faces serious. The head of operations appeared shaken, holding a folder that looked freshly printed. Mrs. Reyes remained composed, her voice firm but controlled. What she was about to reveal would change the course of more than just one flight. And the people in that cabin had no idea just how close they were to being part of airline history. Inside the private front cabin, the atmosphere was tight. The businessman stood awkwardly before Mrs. Reyes, clearly uncomfortable. She looked at him calmly, then at the folder in the operations manager's hands. Without raising her voice, she spoke with quiet authority. "This man," she said, "was scheduled to attend a meeting next week at our headquarters. He's one of the applicants for a senior regional role." The room fell silent. The businessman blinked, stunned. He hadn't expected this. No one had. Mrs. Reyes continued, flipping open the folder. "But before hiring anyone, I always like to see how they treat others when they think no one's watching." Her words were simple, but they landed like thunder. The staff stood straighter. The businessman's face turned a shade paler. "You laughed when I walked into first class," she said, still calm. "You assumed I didn't belong. That told me more about your leadership potential than any resume could." He tried to respond, but no words came. Just a small, tight smile of embarrassment. She didn't scold him further. She didn't need to. Her point had been made. She handed the folder back and nodded to the crew. "That'll be all." The story could have ended there. But just as she turned to leave, the head of operations leaned in with a quiet urgency. "Ma'am, there's something else. It's about Flight 217 next week. The board scheduled an emergency review. They want you to take over the entire route strategy." Mrs. Reyes paused. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "They made that decision without me." He nodded. She took a breath, then smiled faintly. "Looks like this trip's not over yet." As she stepped back into the main cabin, now filled with wide eyes and quiet awe, the passengers knew they had witnessed more than just a flight. They'd seen the quiet power of someone who never needed to prove herself, but did anyway. And the sky hadn't heard the last of her. As Mrs. Reyes returned to her seat, the atmosphere in the cabin had completely changed. The same people who once chuckled at her presence now looked at her with quiet respect, some with admiration, others with regret. A few offered small nods, silent apologies written on their faces. She returned each one with a gentle, knowing smile, never bitter, never boastful. The businessman was escorted back to his seat, his eyes fixed on the floor. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The lesson had already been delivered, one that wouldn't be forgotten. The rest of the flight was quiet. The crew remained attentive, but no longer out of obligation. They were genuinely proud to be serving someone who had helped build the airline they worked for. Behind her modest appearance, Mrs. Reyes had reminded everyone what leadership really looked like: humility, strength, and integrity. When the plane landed, passengers waited, almost hesitant to disembark before her. But she rose calmly, gathered her small bag, and made her way down the aisle like anyone else. No special treatment, no entourage, just a woman with a mission, walking toward the next chapter of her journey. Outside the gate, a company car waited, not a flashy one, just simple and black, with a driver who greeted her by name. As she stepped in, her journal still tucked under her arm, the terminal behind her buzzed with whispers. Stories would spread, posts would be shared, but she wouldn't see most of it. She didn't need recognition. For the passengers on that flight, the day had started with quiet judgment and ended with lasting reflection. Because in the end, the woman they laughed at taught them the most valuable lesson of all: never underestimate someone based on appearance. You never know who truly owns the skies.